All right guys, so in this week's video, I want to talk about some shop storage systems. So obviously I'm in the process of organizing this new shop space. It's coming along really nicely. As you can see behind me, I've gotten my Microsoft station all set up, which is super exciting, but I realized I've never really talked about some of the more popular options in one video, kind of rank them, talk about the pros and cons, because I've had a lot of experience with these various systems because this is my third shop. I've had 2 garage shops as well. So I have basically tried and reconfigured almost all of these systems multiple times, and so I think I have a pretty good handle on what works, what doesn't, what I like. So I want to rate the systems on ease of installation, their customization or adjustability, and their value, because obviously the price ranges on these systems that I'm going to talk about vary widely. So let's go ahead and start at the bottom of the list with number 6. All right guys, so at the bottom of my list, and certainly not a bad system by any means, are these kind of garage track systems. These are made by a bunch of different brands, but I think these are great in some situations, but definitely not all situations. I think what these track systems excel at is hanging longer items. As you can see, I have a bunch of landscaping stuff here, shovels, rakes, landscaping power tools, as well as brooms and that kind of thing. Anything longer, and I think it works really well. Where these systems fall short is when you're trying to store shorter items, and that's because with the way these are designed, if you hang a shorter item on it, it's basically going to take up the entire track. So then to hang more stuff, you're just going to add more and more track pieces, and those definitely start to add up, and I think your kind of value proposition gets worse and worse the more track pieces you have to buy. From a customization and adjustability standpoint, they're pretty good. Of course, all of these hooks and accessories are made by the manufacturer, so you have to buy it from them, but they are very easy to move around. My one worry with these kind of systems is if the manufacturer decides to stop making the system, you're going to be pretty much out of luck when it comes to accessories. Now, I have seen a few people online actually design 3D printed accessories for some of these track systems, so that's pretty cool if you have a 3D printer, but that's just one thing to be aware of. Last, from an ease of installation perspective, these things could not be much simpler. You basically just add a few screws into your studs, or in my case, concrete block wall, and you're pretty much up and running. Again, I think these track systems are not bad by any means, but I just think they're very good for very specific types of storage. Next up on my list are these kind of metal racks or shelving, and you can also DIY these with something like 2x4s and OSB. And I think these are great for longer term storage if you use things like these storage totes, but I don't think they're great for short to medium term storage because they're really just too big. I think they would take up a lot of space on your walls, and if you're trying to store smaller stuff, it would get really difficult to find exactly what you need. They are pretty darn simple to install. You need almost no tools to put these together, and you do have some sort of adjustability of setting the shelf heights, but pretty much once this thing is put together, you are not going to be able to move any of those shelves around without taking everything off the shelf, which would be a total pain. Last, from a value perspective, I think these are decent. Obviously, the metal ones especially are really, really durable. So if you're in more of an industrial environment or something where you're just putting a lot of hard wear and tear on these kind of shelves, these are going to stand the test of time, and pretty much unless you damage the paint and these things start to rust out, I think these would pretty much last you a lifetime. A wooden DIY version might not have as much lasting power, but honestly, you don't put a whole lot of wear and tear on the shelves themselves if you're using something like these storage totes. So overall, I think these are a great longer term storage solution, and as you can see, that's how I personally use these types of systems. So next on my list is Pegboard, and you might be wondering why I'm standing next to this storage cabinet. It's because I don't actually have any traditional Pegboard here in my shop. I'm not personally a huge fan of it, but this storage cabinet does have a little bit of pegboard built into it, so I figured I could kind of illustrate my points with these. So if you have a workshop, you probably either have some in it or you have used it in the past, and I think it's a pretty ubiquitous option. Obviously, you can run out and grab sheets of pegboard and all the kind of hanging accessories you need, so that's definitely a benefit. But let's talk about some of those criteria when it comes to pegboard. So ease of installation, it's fairly simple depending on what you're installing it on. You have to space pegboard off of the wall surface you're installing it on, or you won't be able to get the hooks in. So usually you'll put something like a 2x2 behind it, screw that to your wall, and then screw the pegboard to that. So it's a little bit more involved than, maybe a typical shelving system. From an adjustability and customization standpoint, I would say it's also pretty good. Once again, you're locked into buying all of the hanging accessories from a manufacturer, so you have to make your tools fit those accessories rather than making the accessories fit your tools, which I much prefer, but it is very adjustable, very easy to move the hooks around if you get new tools or need to reorganize things. Another thing I really don't like about Pegboard is a lot of times when you go to grab the tool off of the wall, the hook that it's hanging on will come with it. And that drives me nuts. There are little clips that you can install to avoid that, but I think over time those things pop loose. And last, from a value standpoint, Pegboard is pretty darn cheap, and it's going to be hard to beat it for any kind of wall hanging storage unless you do it yourself, which I'll cover a little later in the video. The other kind of pegboard option that's become really popular lately is metal pegboard. And I think it improves upon regular pegboard in a lot of ways. It's obviously a lot more durable. It's made of metal. I think you could pretty much beat on the things with a hammer and they will still last for a very, very long time. But again, you are locked into buying accessories from the manufacturer. And from a value perspective, these are really, really expensive options. So for like a 32-inch by 32-inch panel setup, which is not very big if you have a larger shop, you're looking at about 50 bucks. So be prepared to spend at least a few $100 if you want to go the metal pegboard route. But again, they are very durable, so they should last a long time and they look really, really nice. All right, guys, while I'm working, let's take a second to talk about the sponsor of this week's video, WaterDrop, and their G3P800 tankless reverse osmosis system. So we're on city water here, and I use filtered water for all of my drinking water, cooking, and coffee. And so I decided to upgrade my water filtration setup by installing this RO system from WaterDrop, and it's already improved my workflow drastically. The system was simple to install, it took less than an hour, and this tankless system fit under my sink nicely without wasting a bunch of space like a tank system. This G3P800 system filters up to 800 gallons of water per day and has a super fast flow rate, producing 1 cup of water in just 6 seconds. This tankless RO system is also super efficient with a 3-to-1 pure to drain ratio, and this means it only uses 1 cup of wastewater to produce 3 cups of filtered water. As you can see, it was easy to install the filters, and through this 9-stage filtration, the system can effectively reduce PFAS, fluoride, heavy metals, salts like nitrate and chloride, as well as larger particulates. The system also includes a UV sterilizing light that automatically turns on when water is flowing, and it has a sterilization rate of up to 99.9%. One of the coolest features of the system is the smart faucet, which shows me real-time TDS levels and water quality on the smart faucet's display. So if you want to improve the quality of your drinking water, I definitely recommend checking out the G3P800 tankless reverse osmosis system from WaterDrop by visiting the link in my video description below. Thanks again to WaterDrop for sponsoring this week's video, and let's get back to work. Next up on my list are these metal kind of rolling tool chests or rolling drawer systems. And I think these are excellent for, again, pretty specific types of items. So when you buy these things, usually they come configured with a bunch of very shallow drawers. And so that makes them really good at storing things like mechanics tools, sockets, wrenches, your woodworker, things like chisels, hand tools, all that kind of stuff. Those kind of smaller, narrower items fit really well in these kind of drawer systems. They're also made of metal, so they're extremely durable. They're obviously really easy to set up. You basically just take them out of the box, throw some casters on, and you are ready to start organizing. From an adjustability and customization perspective, I would say, again, they're pretty good. Obviously, when you buy these, you can choose kind of what size you want to go with. A lot of these have different drawer configurations, so definitely do your research before purchasing. And then once you have it, you can do all kinds of stuff to help organize inside the drawers. You can buy little bins to store small parts. You can add dividers to kind of help segment the drawers, or you could go really nuts with it and go with something like Kaizen foam. That does take a lot of time to set up, but once it's set up, it's a pretty awesome system to have in place in a drawer system like this. Every tool has a spot. All of the tools are firmly held in place so they're not jostling around in the drawers when you're opening and closing it. And best of all, you know when a tool is missing, and so you can go find it in the shop and put it back in its right place. And last, from a value perspective, I actually think these are pretty decent. When you just consider all of the drawer slides that are in these things, that adds up to a good chunk of the cost, plus you add in some heavy duty casters, and then obviously the cabinet itself. And I think you're gonna be hard pressed to build a cabinet this size with this many drawers yourself for the same price or cheaper, unless you already have a bunch of the hardware on hand. All right, moving on to number 2 on my list, I've got shop-built shelving or shop-built cabinets. And obviously I'm a pretty big fan of this. I've got shop-built cabinets pretty much everywhere throughout the shop, and I think it definitely checks a lot of boxes, at least for me. From a customization and adjustability standpoint, I think it's one of the best possible systems because you're building the stuff yourself. You can build it exactly the size you need for whatever tools and things you need to store. So from that standpoint, it's awesome. From a value standpoint, obviously it's usually cheaper to build your own stuff versus buying store-bought. So especially if you have a lot of scrap plywood or random drawer slides hanging around left over from old projects, I think building a system like this is a great way to use it up. But then last, from an ease of installation standpoint, I think it definitely loses out a little bit to some of the other options we've discussed so far. Obviously, building systems like these are pretty big projects, and usually you have to start with the design phase, which can take forever. I know for me, I spend probably way too much time thinking through all of the little details on these kind of projects, but I obviously want them to work for me for a long time. then you have to actually build the project and get everything organized in it, and overall it can take a really long time. Just setting up this miter saw station here at my shop, even though it was already built, has taken me multiple days of work, and when I built this thing originally, it took a heck of a lot longer than that, especially depending on your tool setup. This kind of project can be a very big undertaking. Now that said, if you're looking for this kind of cabinet storage system and you don't necessarily want to build it from scratch, I'd highly recommend checking out your local Habitat for Humanity restore or any kind of used or salvage building supply store, because usually you can find a set of kitchen cabinets there that somebody's pulled out of their old kitchen that they were remodeling, and you can repurpose those cabinets a lot easier than building from scratch. So that's a great option, especially if you're on a tighter budget. And coming in at number 1 on my list, and I'm sure this won't be much of a surprise to any of you who've followed my channel for a while, is of course French Cleat. I mean, can you really beat French Cleat when it comes to shop storage? It is by far, I think, the most adjustable and customizable storage system. Obviously, you can build tool holders for all of the various things you need to hang on the wall. And then if you get new tools and need to rearrange things, you just lift the hangers off of the French Cleat, relocate them to another spot, and it just could not be any simpler. Also, from a value perspective, French Cleat is really hard to beat. You don't need to go with the panelized route that I did. You could just cut the French cleats themselves and screw them right to the wall and save a whole bunch of money on plywood. And making the tool holders themselves is a great way to use up all those little scraps of plywood and hardwood that you've been hanging on to for that one-day project. All that being said, of course, from an ease of installation perspective, it is a little bit more difficult, and you're likely going to spend quite a bit of time building those little tool accessories and getting everything just right. But once again, it should last a really, really long time, and having that kind of customization and adjustability just makes all of that work, in my opinion, very much worth it. So those are the main shop systems that I have experience with, and that's kind of how I would rate them. I'd love to hear if you think I missed any down in the comments below. One other honorable mention I'll give, and it's a system I don't have any experience with, but seems really cool, is Milwaukee's Packout system. That's traditionally been a more kind of job site oriented, take your tools and go type of storage system, but it seems like they're really pushing the kind of shop storage side of things. Again, you are going to be locked into their system, so you're going to have to buy all of the accessories from them. But if you've already got a bunch of Milwaukee stuff, it's definitely a cool system to check out. So hopefully you guys enjoyed this one. If it's your first time here, go ahead and get subscribed and ring the notification bell so you don't miss my future shop projects coming up very soon. Also, I have links to all of the tools and stuff I talked about down in the video description below. And last, if you want to support me, I have merch available. I have plans for a lot of these shop storage projects I've talked about, and I have both Patreon and YouTube members set up, so go check one of those out. All right, thanks for watching, y'all, and until next week, happy building.